They called me Coffee Lady behind my back, the 62-year-old grandmother who swept floors and refilled the break room supplies at Edwards Air Force Base. What they didn't know was that before I became Margaret Chen, invisible custodial worker, I was Captain Margaret Razor Chen, one of the most decorated female pilots in Air Force history. The irony wasn't lost on me as I watched Lieutenant Bradley Thompson swagger past my supply cart without so much as a nod. 10 years ago, I would have outflown him blindfolded. Today, he couldn't even see me. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Hey Coffee Lady, called out Captain Rodriguez from behind his clipboard, we're out of creamer in the pilot's lounge again. I nodded silently, pushing my cart toward the storage room. The pilot's lounge, where I once debriefed missions that saved lives and changed the course of conflicts. Now I cleaned their coffee rings and emptied their trash cans. Before we begin, I want to take a moment to thank each of you for being part of this incredible journey. If you're enjoying these stories of empowerment, consider subscribing. It's completely free and helps us build this amazing community. Let's dive in. The transformation hadn't happened overnight. After my forced early retirement following what the brass called an incident with a superior officer, really just me refusing to stay silent about sexual harassment, finding civilian employment proved impossible. 47 years old with 25 years of flying experience, and somehow I was overqualified for every position I applied for. The settlement money had dried up after my daughter's medical bills. Cancer doesn't care about your military pension. When Sarah died, I was left with custody of my 8-year-old granddaughter Emma and a mortgage I couldn't afford on my reduced benefits. So I did what I had to do. Dyed my hair gray to look older, adopted a hunched posture, and applied for the one job where experience was a liability rather than an asset, custodial services. At Edwards, of all places. The base where I'd once been a legend. Margaret, called out Staff Sergeant Williams from the duty desk, could you take care of the conference room? The colonel wants it spotless for tomorrow's briefing. I shuffled past the group of young pilots clustered around the mission board. Their voices carrying that familiar swagger of those who'd never seen real combat. Thompson was holding court, as usual. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, like this video, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. I'm telling you guys, the C-130 is a piece of cake, he was saying, gesturing with his coffee cup. Big, slow, simple. Any monkey could fly one of those cargo birds. I paused in my sweeping, remembering the 47 C-130 missions I'd flown into hostile territory. The time I'd landed one on a damaged runway in Afghanistan with half the hydraulics shot out. The night I'd evacuated 200 civilians from a compound under siege, taking small arms fire the entire time. Coffee Lady's got her ears on again. Rodriguez chuckled. Probably dreaming about being up there with us real pilots. The laughter stung, but I'd learned to let it wash over me. They had no idea that the woman emptying their trash cans had more flight hours than their entire squadron combined. My phone buzzed with a text from Emma. Grandma, when are you coming home? I finished my math homework and wanted to show you. I smiled, thinking of the bright 8-year-old who made all of this worthwhile. Emma was brilliant, already showing an interest in aeronautics that reminded me of myself at that age. She deserved better than the cramped apartment we shared, better than secondhand clothes and generic cereal. Hey Margaret, Thompson called out suddenly, you've been around this base forever, right? Ever see any real flying back in the day? I looked up from my cart, noting the condescending tone. To him, I was just an old woman who'd probably never been higher than the observation deck. I've seen a thing or two, I replied quietly, returning to my supplies. Bet she used to date pilots back when dinosaurs ruled the earth, Rodriguez added, earning another round of laughter. If only they knew. If only they knew about the classified missions I'd flown, the commendations I'd earned, the innovations I'd developed that they were still using today. But Colonel Sarah Chen was dead, buried along with my daughter 3 years ago. Only Margaret the Coffee Lady remained. The base intercom crackled to life. All personnel, we have an incoming emergency. C-130 Hercules with mechanical failure requesting immediate landing assistance. All non-essential personnel clear the runway areas. Through the windows, I could see the scramble beginning. Emergency vehicles racing toward the airfield, ground crews taking positions. The young pilots pressed against the glass, watching the drama unfold. Poor bastards, Thompson muttered. Probably some reserve unit that doesn't know what they're doing. I bet they panic and auger in. I set down my cleaning supplies and moved to the window. In the distance, I could see the distinctive silhouette of a C-130 Hercules, trailing smoke from its port engine. The aircraft was approaching too fast, too steep, classic signs of hydraulic failure. Control tower, this is Cargo 77. The radio crackled through the base communication system. We've lost primary hydraulics and our backup system is failing. Engine 2 is out, engine 3 is running rough. We have 16 souls on board including 3 wounded. My blood ran cold. 16 people, including wounded. I could see from the aircraft's approach that they were in serious trouble. The nose was too high, the descent rate too fast. Without hydraulics, they'd have limited control over the aircraft's attitude. They're coming in too hot, I whispered, forgetting myself. Thompson glanced at me with amusement. What would you know about it, coffee lady? I bit my tongue, watching. As the C-130 struggled to line up with the runway. The pilot was fighting the aircraft every inch of the way, but I could see the signs of inexperience in the approach. They were overcorrecting, making the situation worse. Control tower, we're declaring an emergency. The pilot's voice was strained now. We're having trouble maintaining altitude. Requesting emergency landing on any available runway. Cargo 77. You're cleared for emergency landing on runway 27. Fire and rescue are standing by. Through the window, I watched the C-130 fight its way toward the airfield. The young pilots in the lounge were riveted, some making comments about the pilot's technique. None of them understood what they were seeing. He's too high, Rodriguez observed. Gonna have to go around. Can't go around with that much damage, another pilot added. He's committed now. I could see what they couldn't, the subtle signs. That the aircraft was on the edge of a stall. The nose attitude was too high for the airspeed, the descent rate too erratic. In my mind, I was flying that approach, feeling the controls in my hands, knowing exactly what needed to be done. The C-130 crossed the runway threshold at what looked like twice the normal speed. I held my breath as the pilot tried to flare for landing, but without proper hydraulic control, the aircraft ballooned back into the air. He's gonna crash, someone whispered. The Hercules slammed back down onto the runway with tremendous force, bounced once, twice, then started a violent ground loop as the pilot lost directional control. I watched in horror as the massive aircraft skidded off the runway toward the grass, its landing gear collapsing under the stress, but then something remarkable happened. The aircraft shuddered to a stop just short of the fuel depot, its crew and passengers alive but shaken. Emergency vehicles swarmed the scene as personnel evacuated through the rear cargo ramp. Lucky, Thompson observed. Pure luck that they didn't kill everyone on board. I turned away from the window, my hands shaking slightly. It hadn't been luck, it had been the margin of error that C-130s were built with, combined with a pilot who'd managed to keep his head just long enough to get the aircraft on the ground. Margaret, Staff Sergeant Williams called out, the Colonel wants to see you in his office. I frowned, wondering what Colonel Morrison could want with the custodial staff. I gathered my supplies and made my way down the familiar corridors toward the command section. Colonel Morrison was a decent man in his 50s, career Air Force but without the ego that plagued some officers. His office was Spartan but organized, dominated by photos of aircraft and commendations from his own flying career. Sit down, Margaret, he said, gesturing to a chair across from his desk. I remained standing, as was appropriate for my position. Is there a problem with my work, sir? Sit down, he repeated firmly. We need to talk. Reluctantly, I took the offered chair, wondering if someone had complained about my cleaning or if budget cuts were affecting the custodial staff. That was quite a landing out there, he began, nodding toward the window that overlooked the airfield. What did you think of the pilot's technique? The question caught me off guard. Sir? You were watching from the pilot's lounge. Staff Sergeant Williams mentioned you seemed knowledgeable about what was happening. I chose my words carefully. I've worked around aircraft for a long time, sir. You pick up things. Colonel Morrison studied me for a long moment, then opened a file on his desk. Margaret Chen. Custodial services for 3 years. Excellent performance reviews. Security clearance up to date. He paused. But that's not your real file, is it? My heart stopped. Sir? I've been in the Air Force for 28 years, Margaret. I know when someone's background doesn't add up. A woman your age, working custodial at a test base, with a top-secret clearance that somehow stays current? That's not normal. I remained silent, my mind racing through contingencies I'd hoped never to use. I did some digging, he continued. Captain Margaret Chen, test pilot. One of the first women certified on the C-130. Decorated combat veteran. Forced into early retirement after filing harassment charges against a superior officer. The room felt suddenly cold. That person doesn't exist anymore, sir. Bullshit. Morrison's voice was sharp. I read your file, your real file. The missions. You flew, the lives you saved. The innovations you developed that we're still using. You didn't stop being that pilot because some asshole couldn't keep his hands to himself. I stood up abruptly. With respect, Colonel, my past isn't relevant to emptying trash cans. Sit down, he commanded, using his full authority now. Because I'm about to make you an offer you can't refuse. Reluctantly, I returned to my seat. The pilot of that C-130 is in the hospital with a concussion. His co-pilot broke his wrist in the landing. But here's the problem, that aircraft contains classified materials that need to be moved to Nellis Air Force Base within 72 hours. The C-130 is reparable, but it needs someone who can fly a damaged bird. I shook my head. Colonel, I haven't been in a cockpit in 15 years. My certifications are still valid, he interrupted. I checked. Your flight status was suspended, not revoked. And I have the authority to reinstate your qualifications for this mission. Sir, I don't think you understand. I'm not the same pilot I was. Age, reflexes, currency the C-130 crew chief looked at that aircraft. Morrison continued as if I hadn't spoken. Preliminary assessment says it's flyable, but it'll take someone with exceptional skill to get it to Nellis. Someone who's flown damaged birds before. Someone who knows every system on a Hercules like their own heartbeat. I thought about Emma, about the bills piling up, about the cramped apartment and the second-hand clothes. Then I thought about what flying meant to me, what I'd given up. Why? I asked quietly. Why me? There are dozens of qualified pilots on this base. Because none of them have your experience. None of them have flown a C-130 with combat damage. And brought it home. None of them have the instincts that kept you alive through 47 combat missions. Morrison leaned forward. I need someone who can fly that bird like it's an extension of their own body. Someone who won't panic when systems fail. Someone who earned the call sign Razor because they could cut through any problem in the sky. The weight of 15 years pressed down on me. 15 years of being invisible, of being dismissed, of pretending to be less than I was. The pay would be contractor rates, Morrison added. $50,000 for one mission. Plus, if you're interested, we might have other opportunities for someone with your unique qualifications. $50,000. Enough to move Emma to a better neighborhood, to buy her the computer she needed for school, to stop worrying about every grocery bill. What's the condition of the aircraft? I asked, hating myself for the hope in my voice. Morrison smiled. Why? Don't you go take a look? The crew chief is waiting for you at Hangar 7. As I stood to leave, he called after me. Margaret? It's good to have you back. Walking across the tarmac toward Hangar 7, I felt the familiar pull of the aircraft. Around me. The smell of jet fuel and hydraulic fluid, the sound of engines being tested, the sight of aircraft lined up like sleeping birds of prey. The C-130 sat in the hangar like a wounded giant, its damaged engine cowling removed, various panels open. As technicians assessed the damage, Chief Master Sergeant Jackson, a man I'd worked with years ago, looked up as I approached. Well, I'll be damned, he said, recognition dawning on his face. Captain Chen. Though I hear it's Margaret now. Just Margaret, I replied, studying the aircraft's condition. She's hurt, but she's flyable, Jackson said, following my gaze. Lost the number 2 engine completely, catastrophic failure. Number 3 is running rough but stable. Hydraulics are patched but holding pressure. The real problem is the control system. It's going to be like flying a freight train. I walked around the aircraft, running my hands along the fuselage, checking the control surfaces, examining the damage with eyes that had seen worse and brought aircraft home anyway. "What's your assessment?" I asked. "Honestly? It'll take someone with brass balls and magic fingers to get her to Nellis. But if anyone can do it." He gestured at the aircraft. "Want to take a look at the cockpit?" I climbed up into the C-130's cockpit, and 15 years fell away in an instant. The familiar layout, the worn controls, the smell of leather and electronics. My hands found the controls without conscious thought, muscle memory taking over. "She'll fly," I said quietly, running through mental checklists I'd memorized decades ago. "But it won't be pretty." "You taking the mission?" Jackson asked. I thought about Thompson and Rodriguez, about all the young pilots who saw me as nothing more than the coffee lady. I thought about Emma waiting at home, about the bills on my kitchen table, about the woman I used to be. "Yeah," I said, settling into the pilot's seat like coming home. "I'm taking the mission." As I began my pre-flight inspection, I could see ground crew members gathering outside the hangar, word spreading that the old cleaning lady was apparently a pilot. Tomorrow, when I fired up those engines and took this wounded bird into the sky, they would finally see who Margaret Chen really was, but first, I had to prove it to myself. Everyone ignored the gray-haired woman, until she landed a damaged C-130, Part 2, complete. Word spread through Edwards Air Force Base like wildfire. By 0600 hours, the rumor mill was in overdrive. The cleaning lady was supposedly going to fly the damaged C-130. I could hear the whispers and chuckles as I made my way to the flight line, still wearing my custodial uniform but carrying a flight bag I hadn't touched in 15 years. "You've got to be kidding me," Thompson's voice carried across the hangar as I approached. He was standing with Rodriguez and half a dozen other pilots, all staring at me like I'd grown a second head. "The coffee lady is seriously going to try to fly that wreck?" Colonel Morrison emerged from the hangar, clipboard in hand. "Gentlemen, I'd like you to meet Captain Margaret Chen. She'll be flying today's mission to Nellis." The silence was deafening. Rodriguez actually laughed out loud. "Sir, with all due respect," Thompson stepped forward, "this has to be some kind of joke. She's a janitor. She probably doesn't even have a driver's license, let alone a pilot's license." Morrison's expression hardened. "Captain Chen has more flight time in C-130s than this entire group combined. She's also flown more combat missions than any pilot currently stationed at Edwards." I watched their faces cycle through disbelief, confusion, and dawning recognition. Several of the older NCOs were beginning to put the pieces together, remembering stories they'd heard about a legendary female pilot from years past. "That's impossible," Rodriguez protested. "We would have known if there was a qualified pilot working maintenance around here." "Would you?" I asked quietly, speaking for the first time. My voice had changed, no longer the timid whisper of Margaret the janitor, but the clear, confident tone of Captain Razor Chen. "When was the last time any of you actually looked at me? Really looked?" Chief Jackson stepped up beside me, carrying a flight suit. "Fresh from supply, Captain. Your size, if I remember correctly." As I took the flight suit, Thompson's phone buzzed. He glanced at it, then his face went pale. "Holy shit," he whispered, then louder, "Guys, check your phones." Someone posted Captain Margaret Chen's service record. I watched as one by one, they pulled up my military history on their devices. The Distinguished Flying Cross. The Air Medal with 4 oak leaf clusters. Commendations for valor, for innovation, for leading successful missions into the most dangerous airspace imaginable. 47 combat missions, someone read aloud. Test pilot certification on 12 different aircraft types. Instructor pilot. Rating. First woman to successfully land a C-130 on a carrier deck during emergency operations. Rodriguez looked up from his phone, his face flushed with embarrassment. "You're really her. You're Razor Chen." I corrected, heading toward the equipment room to change. "Today, I'm just the pilot flying a broken bird to Nellis." 20 minutes later, I emerged in my flight suit, every inch the Air Force officer I'd once been. The transformation was remarkable. Gone was the hunched posture, the gray hair now tucked under a regulation cap. The demeanor completely changed from invisible janitor to commanding pilot. The young pilots were clustered around Chief Jackson, bombarding him with questions about my service record. I could hear fragments of their conversation as I approached the aircraft. She really flew into Baghdad during the invasion. Says here she saved 200 civilians during the evacuation of Kabul. Look at this, she developed the modified approach procedure we still use for short field landings. Thompson stepped away from the group, his earlier arrogance replaced by something resembling shame. Captain Chen, I owe you an apology. We all do. The things we said, you said what you believed based on what you saw, I replied, beginning my external pre-flight inspection. But that's a lesson worth remembering, you never know who you're really talking to. The C-130's damage was extensive but manageable. The number 2 engine was completely gone, its mount blackened from the fire that had consumed it. Number 3 showed signs of distress but was holding together. The real challenge would be the compromised hydraulics and the shifted weight distribution. Ma'am, a young crew chief approached nervously, I'm Airman Peterson. I'll be monitoring the engine parameters during startup. I nodded, noting his deference, a sharp contrast to how these same airmen had treated me yesterday. What's your assessment of number 3? Running hot but stable, ma'am. We've got replacement parts standing by at Nellis if you can get her there. As I continued my inspection, more personnel gathered to watch. Word had spread beyond the flight line, maintenance crews, administrative staff, even some of the base commanders had come out to witness what was being called either a miraculous resurrection or an elaborate disaster in the making. My phone buzzed with a text from Emma, Grandma, kids at school are saying you're really a pilot. Is it true? I smiled, typing back, ask me tonight, sweetheart. I'll have stories to tell. Colonel Morrison approached as I completed my external inspection. How's she looking, Captain? Flyable, I replied. But it's going to be interesting. With the weight shift from the missing engine and the hydraulic limitations, I'll need to handfly her the entire route. No autopilot. Concerned about anything specific? I pointed to the damaged control surfaces. Asymmetrical thrust is going to be significant. Landing at Nellis will require every bit of skill I have, and probably some luck too. If anyone can do it. Morrison began. I can do it, I said firmly. Question is whether these young pilots are ready to see what real flying looks like. As if summoned by my words, Thompson approached with his squadron mates trailing behind. Captain Chen, we were wondering, could we observe the startup and departure? From the tower, I mean? I studied his face, seeing genuine curiosity replacing the earlier mockery. This isn't a show, Lieutenant. This is a dangerous flight with classified cargo. But if the Colonel approves and you promise to stay out of the way, approved, Morrison said immediately. Might be educational. I climbed into the cockpit, and the familiar ritual began. Switch positions, gauge readings, system checks, each action performed with the precision born of thousands of hours of experience. Through the windscreen, I could see the crowd gathering on the observation deck. Edwards Tower, Cargo 77 requesting engine start, I radioed. Cargo 77, you're cleared for engine start. Be advised, we have multiple observers for your departure. Copy, Tower. Beginning startup sequence. The number 1 engine spooled up smoothly, its familiar whine filling the cockpit. Number 3 took longer, coughing and hesitating before settling into an uneven but stable rhythm. The missing number 2 created an eerie silence on the left side. Cargo 77. Ready for taxi, I called once my checks were complete. 77, taxi to runway 27. Wind 090 at 15, gusting to 25. A crosswind with gusts, perfect. I began the taxi, immediately feeling the aircraft's tendency to weathervane due to the asymmetrical thrust. Every movement required correction, every turn demanded full attention. Through the tower windows, I could see the faces watching my every move. Thompson had his phone out, probably recording. Others were taking notes. All of them were about to see something they'd never witnessed before. Tower, 77 holding short, ready for departure. 77, winds now 080 at 20, gusting to 30. You're cleared for takeoff. I lined up on the runway centerline, feeling the aircraft buck and sway in the gusty crosswind. With one engine missing, the takeoff would require precise rudder control to prevent the aircraft from departing controlled flight. Here we go, I whispered, advancing the throttles. The C-130 lurched forward, immediately trying to veer left due to the asymmetrical thrust. I applied right rudder, feeling through my feet the constant battle between the aircraft's desire to turn and my commands to go straight. 50 knots. The rudder was becoming effective, but the crosswind was pushing us toward the right edge of the runway. 70 knots. Number 3 engine was running hot, temperature climbing toward the yellow arc. 90 knots. We were approaching rotation speed, but the aircraft felt heavy, reluctant to leave the ground. At 110 knots, I eased back on the yoke. The C-130 lifted off, climbing slowly but steadily. Through the tower windows, I could see people pointing and gesturing as the wounded bird took flight. 77, contact departure control, the tower called. Nice takeoff, Captain. Thank you, tower. 77 switching to departure. 20 minutes later, I was cruising at 15,000 feet, the landscape of California spreading out below me. The flight to Nellis would take just over an hour, but every minute would require constant attention. The asymmetrical thrust meant continuous pressure on the rudder pedals, and the compromised hydraulics made every control input a negotiation rather than a command. My phone, connected to the aircraft's communication system, chimed with messages. Emma had sent a photo of herself wearing one of my old flight caps, grinning widely. Below it, she'd written, "My grandma is the coolest pilot ever." Other messages were flooding in too. Fellow pilots I hadn't spoken to in years, congratulating me on my return to the cockpit. Reporters wanting interviews. Even a message from the Pentagon expressing interest in my story, but the most surprising message was from James Mitchell, my former squadron commander, the man whose harassment had ended my career. "Razor, heard you're flying again. Always knew you were the best pilot I ever served with. I owe you an apology that's 15 years overdue." I deleted the message without responding. Some bridges were burned beyond repair. Nellis Tower, Cargo 77 with you, level at 15,000, requesting approach information. 77, Nellis weather is winds 270 at 12, visibility unlimited, altimeter 3015. Be advised, we have emergency equipment standing by per your request. The approach to Nellis would be the real test. Landing a damaged aircraft with asymmetrical thrust and compromised controls required timing and precision that left no room for error. As I began my descent, I could see Nellis Air Force Base in the distance, its runways laid out like concrete ribbons in the desert. The number 3 engine was running increasingly rough, temperature creeping toward the red line. 77, you're cleared for straight-in approach to runway 21. Emergency equipment is standing by. I configured the aircraft for landing, feeling each control input carefully. The flaps created additional drag that made the asymmetrical thrust more pronounced. The landing gear extended with a satisfying thunk, but I could feel the aircraft wanting to roll left. Looking good, 77, the tower controller called. Maintain current approach. But I could feel something changing. The number 3 engine was losing power, its temperature now solidly in the red. If it failed completely, I'd be landing a 4-engine aircraft on just 2 engines, a challenging proposition under the best circumstances. Tower, 77. I'm showing high engine temperature on number 3. May need to shut it down. Copy, 77. Continue approach, we're standing by. Decision time. I could shut down the failing engine and attempt a 2-engine landing, or try to nurse the dying power plant through one more approach. The safe choice was obvious, but the safe choice might not get me to the runway. The engine temperature spiked into the dangerous zone. I had to make the call. 77, shutting down number 3 engine, I announced, pulling the engine fire handle and watching the propeller feather. Now I was landing a C-130 on 2 engines, both on the right side of the aircraft. The asymmetrical thrust was extreme, requiring full left rudder just to maintain straight flight. 77, do you need to declare an emergency? The tower asked. Negative, tower. Just flying a very unbalanced airplane. Through my headset, I could hear secondary radio chatter from Edwards. Apparently, they were monitoring my frequency, and word of my engine failure had reached the observers there. She's lost another engine, someone was saying. No way she can land that thing. You don't know Razor Chen, came Chief Jackson's voice. If anyone can bring that bird home, it's her. The runway was coming up fast now, but the aircraft was fighting me every inch of the way. With only two engines providing thrust, both on the right side, the C-130 wanted to turn left constantly. My left leg was cramping from the constant pressure on the rudder pedal. 7-7, you're slightly left of centerline, the tower advised. I could see that. The crosswind, combined with the asymmetrical thrust, was pushing me off the runway alignment. I needed more right rudder, but I was already at the limit of what the aircraft could provide. 500 feet above the ground. The runway was filling my windscreen, but I was still drifting left. At this rate, I'd touch down on the grass beside the runway instead of on the concrete. Think, Margaret. What would Chen do? The answer came to me in a flash of inspiration. Instead of fighting the left drift, I could use it. By banking the aircraft slightly right and using the resulting slip to counteract the drift, I could maintain runway alignment. It was an unconventional technique, one that would make aviation purists cringe, but it worked. The C-130 straightened out over the runway centerline. 7-7, nice correction, the tower called. Looking good for landing. 100 feet. 50 feet. I pulled the throttles back and felt for the runway with the main landing gear. The touchdown was firm but controlled, the aircraft settling onto the concrete with a satisfying rumble, but the real challenge was just beginning. With no thrust reversers on the failed engines and limited braking, stopping the heavy aircraft would require every technique I'd ever learned. I deployed the remaining thrust reversers and stood on the brakes, feeling the anti-skid system cycle as it fought to maintain tire contact with the runway. The C-130 decelerated steadily but slowly, eating up runway at an alarming rate. Come on, I muttered, willing the aircraft to stop. With less than 1,000 feet of runway remaining, the C-130 finally rolled to a halt. I sat back in my seat, feeling the adrenaline slowly drain from my system. 7-7, welcome to Nellis, the tower called. Outstanding job, Captain. Follow the truck to parking. As I taxied to the ramp, I could see ground crews and personnel gathering to meet the aircraft. Word of the dramatic landing had spread quickly, and it seemed like half the base had come out to witness the arrival. I shut down the remaining engines and completed my post-flight checklist, then sat quietly in the cockpit for a moment. Through the windscreen, I could see a crowd of people waiting, including several officers with enough rank on their shoulders to start their own small air force. My phone was buzzing constantly now with messages, calls, and notifications. The video of my landing had apparently gone viral on social media, with aviation enthusiasts worldwide sharing and commenting on the footage, but the message that mattered most was from Emma. Grandma, I saw the video. You're famous. I'm so proud of you. A knock on the cockpit door interrupted my thoughts. A young airman was standing at the entrance, holding a ladder. Ma'am, the general would like to speak with you when you're ready. I gathered my gear and climbed down from the aircraft. The crowd parted as I walked toward the waiting officers. And I could hear the whispered conversations following in my wake. That's her, that's Margaret Chen. Did you see that landing? 2 engines, crosswind, damaged aircraft. She made it look easy. General Patricia Williams, commander of Nellis Air Force Base, stepped forward to greet me. Captain Chen, that was one hell of a piece of flying. Welcome to Nellis. Thank you, General. The aircraft and cargo are secure. Chief Jackson at Edwards will have the full maintenance report. About that, General Williams smiled. I had an interesting conversation with the Pentagon this morning. It seems there's renewed interest in your unique qualifications. How would you feel about coming back to active duty? The offer hung in the air like a challenge. Return to the career I'd loved, the identity I'd been forced to abandon. But on my own terms this time, with the respect I'd earned. I'd be honored, General. But I have one condition. Name it. I want to establish a program for older pilots, experienced aviators who've been overlooked or forced out. There's a lot of knowledge walking around in civilian clothes that the Air Force could use. General Williams extended her hand. Done. When can you start? 3 hours later, I was back at Edwards, walking across the tarmac toward the hangar where my adventure had begun. But this time, I wasn't wearing a custodial uniform. This time, I was Captain Margaret Chen again. The crowd from the morning had grown throughout the day. Pilots, maintenance crews, administrative staff, and even some civilians had gathered to welcome me back. As I approached, they began to applaud. Thompson stepped forward, his earlier arrogance completely gone. Captain Chen, I want to apologize again for how we treated you. We had no idea. You had no idea because you never bothered to look, I replied. But that's a lesson you'll remember. Sometimes the most extraordinary people are hiding in plain sight. Rodriguez nodded earnestly. Ma'am, could you teach us? I mean, what you did today. None of us could have pulled that off. I looked around at the young faces, seeing genuine respect where there had once been dismissive laughter. Flying isn't just about technical skill, I said. It's about experience, judgment, and the wisdom to know when to break the rules and when to follow them absolutely. Those lessons take time to learn. Chief Jackson appeared at my elbow, grinning widely. Captain, the base commander wants to see you. Something about a permanent position and a substantial pay increase. As I walked toward the command building, I pulled out my phone and called Emma. Grandma, her excited voice filled the speaker. Everyone at school is talking about you. Are you really going back to being a pilot? Yes, sweetheart. Your grandma is going back to flying. Will you teach me someday? I smiled, thinking about the future that had suddenly opened up before us. Absolutely. But first, you need to finish your homework. Already done. I want to learn everything about airplanes. 6 months later, I stood in front of a classroom full of military aviators, both young and old. The Veteran Pilot Integration Program had become a model for the entire Department of Defense, bringing experienced aviators back into service while mentoring the next generation. Thompson sat in the front row, taking notes as I explained advanced emergency procedures. Rodriguez was there too, along with dozens of other pilots who had learned that experience was worth more than ego. On the wall behind me hung a photo of the damaged C-130 I'd flown to Nellis, along with a plaque that read, Captain Margaret Chen, proving that the best pilots aren't always the youngest, loudest, or most visible. Sometimes they're the ones who've been there all along, waiting for someone to notice. Emma, now 9 and already taking flying lessons at the local airport, had added her own handwritten note to the bottom of the plaque, My grandma can fly anything. During the break, a young female lieutenant approached me. Ma'am, I wanted to thank you. Before your program, I was thinking about leaving the Air Force. The culture was difficult for women. But seeing what you've accomplished, proving that age and experience matter more than politics. What's your name, Lieutenant? Sarah Kim, ma'am. I'm a C-130 pilot. I smiled, remembering my own struggles as a young female aviator. Lieutenant Kim, let me tell you something. The sky doesn't care about your gender, your age, or what anyone thinks about your qualifications. The sky only cares about your skill. Master that, and everything else becomes irrelevant. As the class resumed, I reflected on the journey that had brought me here. From invisible janitor to respected instructor, from dismissed has-been to pioneer of a new program that was changing lives. The best revenge, I'd learned, wasn't about proving people wrong. It was about proving yourself right, regardless of what anyone else thought. After all, some of us are born to fly. And when we finally spread our wings, the whole world takes notice. That evening, I flew home in my own aircraft, a beautifully restored P-51 Mustang that Emma had dubbed Grandma's Rocket. As I performed a victory roll over our new house in a better neighborhood, I could see Emma in the backyard, watching and waving. Tomorrow, she would start her first official flying lesson. The next generation of pilots was ready to take wing, and I would be there to guide them into the sky. Some stories end with revenge. Others end with redemption. The best ones end with hope for the future. Mine ended with all three. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to like, subscribe and turn on the notification bell, so you don't miss any upload from us.